Finally, let's Google this. Chris Hedges. The Pulitzer Prize winning best-selling author, war reporter, journalist, and activist Chris Hedges. I mean, really. Corporate media is that fucking afraid of brilliant minds pushing to shift paradigms, they won't even send out an overworked, underpaid intern to cover a 900-person rally, complete with the pioneer of Fight for 15, Chris Hedges, Jill Stein, and members of the Irish and Greek government. Ah, you're so fucking pathetic. But my soapbox rant on corporate media aside, let's step briefly into the mind of Chris Hedges. Why was it important for you to be here tonight?
Because I think that seismic change will be local. We can't compete on the national level. I mean, Hillary Clinton is raising $2.5 billion plus her super PACs. I mean, I worked for Nader in 2008, so I got a kind of up-close look. So we're going to have to chip away at the edifice from below. That's why I'm here.
And I read recently that you had written, as a quote, I believe, that the revolution is simmering. How do we bring it to a boil?
Well, we don't have to bring it to a boil. The state will bring it to a boil. The longer the state refuses to respond to the most basic needs of the citizenry, the more, in the name of austerity, it exacts blood from the working class and the poor, the more it ensures blowback. And you're already seeing blowback in places like Ferguson and Baltimore.
And do you feel, because I so often, particularly in my age group, 18 to 30, people feel that voting is pointless, they say, because their voice doesn't matter. How do you feel that frustration that is so tactile, that's so tangibly felt, how do you feel that activists can direct that towards these movements?
Well, you can't vote for the Democratic or the Republican Party. I mean, that's why I was involved with Nader, and I was a speechwriter in 2008. So in the last election, I voted Green. And, I just won't vote for those parties. But on the local level, we have the capacity to push forward candidates like Kshama Sawant and make inroads into the party structure. And, of course, that's why the Democratic establishment, not just locally but nationally, is throwing everything they have to crush her.
And is that the same concept? I read also in a recent article that you wrote that the mania for positive thinking will be our downfall. And on that local level, is that the same way that you turn that mania for positive thinking into activist realism?
Well, I mean, that mania for positive thinking kind of disempowers us in that we just sort of assume that human progress is inevitable and things will get better. And in fact, the reality before us, even if we stopped all carbon emissions today, is very, very grim. And we're going to have to grapple with that reality and respond to it rather than remain kind of entranced by positivism and the electronic hallucinations of the entertainment industry. And we're going to have to wake up very quick. And that is kind of the existential crisis of our time, to understand the reality around us, the reconfigurations of power, especially corporate power, what's happening within the ecosystem, what the security and surveillance and the militarized, police, what all of that means, and then react.
And you say the national level is too abstract, it's too big, so people have to work on the local level. Right. Do you see this spreading, how do you see this spreading from the local level, like with Kshama, into the national or even the state level?
Well, it is spreading, and that's why they want to crush it, because they don't want it to spread. I mean, you saw $15 an hour minimum wage passed in Seattle, now it's passed in LA. Well, that's not something they wanted to continue. I think that we should build a national party like Syriza, but with the understanding that it's not so much to win. The elections are not the end result, but it's a political expression of movements like Black Lives Matter, like the campaign to raise for 15, like the debt jubilee, like the anti-fracking industry. It gives a political face to those radical grassroots groups. I think we need that. And I think we need it on a national level with the understanding that, those political entities are designed to actually feed and sustain and give expression to those movements, that the election day is just a kind of a milestone to something bigger.
And speaking in terms of the concept of revolution, is there a worry in your mind that pushing the U.S. to this point of revolution where it gets so bad that people actually do revolt, is there that threat of a power vacuum that, based on our sizable military, the military will just move in and fill that? Speak to that concept.
Well, I mean, there's a chapter in my new book, Wages of Rebellion, called Vigilante Violence. And, right wing, white male vigilante violence has unfortunately been a very important part of our history, going all the way back to the slave patrols, but the Pinkertons, the gun thugs, the Baldwin Felts, And, you see it in the Tea Party and the militia and the Christian right. And those of us who care about a populist, egalitarian movement have been severely weakened in the name of anti-communism. So there definitely will be blowback. There's no question. But it may be right wing. It may be a right wing backlash, and especially given the level of violence that is within the DNA of American society. I mean, we can't discount that.
And how do you feel that us on the left should respond to that?
By building movements as fast as we can, and by stopping this ridiculous flirtation with the structures of power. Bernie Sanders. I mean, it's over. We've got to seriously impede power, corporate power, while there's still time, because in moments of turmoil and unrest, it'll be a lot harder for us to organize and get out on the streets.